When my cheating wife came home, I was gone, and the only things left behind were an envelope and a photograph. Well, another heartbreaking story today. Let's get into it. You're so boring, Phoenix. You know that? You're just... God, you're so predictable. Every single day, the same table, the same book, the same cup of coffee. Don't you ever want more than this? My name is Phoenix Grond. And those were the last words my wife Ella said to me before she left for what she called a work conference. She said them the way people say things they have been thinking for a long time, but kept polite. Until one evening the politeness just wore through. She said them at the kitchen table, her coat already on, her bag already over her shoulder, her eyes already somewhere I was not. And then she walked out, and I sat there with my book and my coffee cup, and I did not say a word. Because I had learned something from my father that most men never get taught, that the quietest response is sometimes the most honest one, and because I had known, for 2 years before that evening, exactly what was happening. I just had not been ready to leave yet. Not because I was afraid, because I was not finished making sure she would be okay. Let me take you back to the beginning, or close enough to it. My father, Grond, was a railroad man. Grease-blackened hands, $20 boots, and a dignity that asked nothing from anyone. We lost our house when I was 11. For 11 months we slept in a storage unit he had rented with the last of his savings. He never complained, not once. He would sit on an overturned crate in that concrete room at the end of the day and just be still, the way a man is still when he has accepted the facts and is working quietly toward the solution. That stillness was the only inheritance he left me. I carried it into every room of my adult life. I taught myself financial planning from library books. I built a client list from nothing. I bought a modest car, wore the same watch for 9 years, cooked my own meals, and told myself every morning that a man who plans is a man who wins. I was 32 when I met Ella at a charity auction. She laughed at something stupid I said about canapes, and I thought she was the realest thing I had ever seen. I gave her everything I had quietly, the way my father worked, without fanfare, without needing to be noticed. A house in a good neighborhood, vacations we planned together, a life that looked ordinary from the outside but felt to me like the most extraordinary thing I had ever built. I believed in it completely. Right up until the afternoon, a retired schoolteacher named Mrs. Albright came across the street with a Ziploc bag and trembling hands, and showed me a photograph. Please, before I continue, kindly like, share, and subscribe for more interesting stories. The photograph was printed on standard paper, the kind you print at home, slightly overexposed from an afternoon sun, grainy at the edges, but perfectly clear where it mattered. Ella's driveway, the front walkway, my wife, and a man I had never seen before that moment, standing closer to her than colleagues stand, his hand at the small of her back, her face tilted up at him with an expression I had never once seen her turn toward a camera, unguarded, wanting, real. Mrs. Albright held the Ziploc bag with both hands and kept apologizing, kept saying she didn't want to, kept saying she had prayed it meant nothing. I told her it was all right. I told her she had done the right thing. I walked her back across the street, thanked her at her door, came back inside, sat down at the kitchen table, that same kitchen table, and did not move for 4 hours. I did not cry. I did not break anything. I just sat the way my father used to sit after bad news, completely still, and I let the facts settle into me like sediment until I could see the bottom clearly. Then I opened my laptop and I began to plan. What I did not do, and this is the part people will never fully understand, was confront her. Not that night. Not the next morning. Not ever. Because I had watched my father spend 11 months in a storage unit not out of weakness, but out of refusal to leave until he had somewhere better to go. And I understood, with a certainty that lived in my bones rather than my head, that I would not blow up my own life out of anger. I would not hand Ella a screaming match she could reframe as my failure. I would not leave until I had somewhere better to go, and until she had everything she needed to survive without me. So I did something that would have looked, from the outside, like nothing at all. I kept coming home. I kept cooking dinner. I kept reading at the kitchen table with my coffee cup. I kept being the man she had just decided was too boring, too predictable, too still. And underneath that stillness, I was building. The first thing I built was distance, financial, legal, invisible. I had already purchased land 3 states away 6 years earlier, paying cash in quiet installments, telling no one. A small piece of rural ground that I'd had a modest house built on over time, practical and clean, the kind of house my father would have stood in front of and nodded at. Over the following months, I began moving my professional life there piece by piece, restructuring my client practice, updating contact information, framing everything as a business transition so that no one blinked. I prearranged utilities. I transferred the deed to our house into Ella's name alone. I split our joint accounts legally and left her half untouched. Every cent she had ever earned sitting exactly where she left it, and every evening I came home, sat at the kitchen table, and read my book. She never once asked what I was thinking about. The night Ella came home to an empty house, I was 3 states away sitting on a porch I built with money she never knew I had. I know what she found because I planned every detail of what she would find. The envelope centered precisely on the kitchen table, the photograph beside it, face down. I knew she would turn the photograph over first. Ella always reached for the visual before the written word. I knew she would see the timestamp, 26 months ago. I knew the recognition would hit her like cold water, the memory of that afternoon, how certain she had been that nobody was watching. Then she would flip it over and read the 4 words I wrote on the back. Not in anger, not an accusation, just truth, offered quietly, the way my father offered everything. I believed in us. Then she would open the envelope. She would find the divorce papers, already filed, the bank statement showing I had taken nothing of hers. The typed letter. I typed it because my handwriting would have cracked, and I refused to let her see me crack, and the wedding photograph. I had held that one the longest before placing it inside. The letter said, "I did not leave because I stopped loving you. I left because I realized you stopped wanting to be loved correctly. The house is paid off. The deed is in your name. I have arranged for the utilities to continue for 60 days. I wish you no harm. P." I typed it 14 times before that version. The first 13 kept bleeding into something that sounded like begging, or anger, or both. I needed it to sound like neither. I needed it to sound like the man I had spent my whole life becoming, the man my father raised without ever once using that phrase. I wished her no harm. That was not performance. I genuinely, completely, with my whole chest, wished her no harm. That was perhaps the strangest part of the whole 2 years, discovering that love and betrayal can exist in the same body without canceling each other out. That you can know someone is destroying what you built together and still wake up the next morning and make sure her car insurance is renewed, still shovel the driveway before she wakes, still leave her half of everything untouched. By midnight, she had called 6 people. I know because Dara told me later, her voice somewhere between exhausted and something she couldn't name. Troy told Ella he thought we had discussed my practice restructure together, which was true in the sense that I had told him it was a mutual transition, and Troy, who trusted me completely, had never questioned it. Then she called Dara. My sister picked up on the second ring. She had been waiting by her phone for 3 weeks, ever since the morning I texted her one line from a gas station 2 hours outside the city. "I'm good. Don't tell her where I am. Not yet." Dara had sat on her kitchen floor and cried for an hour after that text. Then she made herself a cup of coffee because that is what I would have done, and she waited. When Ella asked how long Dara had known, the silence on that line was the loudest answer Ella would ever receive. Dara said, "Long enough to watch him make sure you'd be okay first." Then she said goodnight and hung up. Ella sat on the kitchen floor until almost 2 a.m. 3 days after the envelope, Ella drove to my father's grave. I don't know what pulled her there. Ella was never someone who visited cemeteries voluntarily, but she went. She found the headstone, and then she found what I had not thought to hide. The compression in the grass directly in front of it, where I had sat on the morning I left, for 20 minutes, talking to my father out loud the way I only ever did when no one else was around. I had told him I was okay. I had told him I planned it right. The morning dew had not fully resettled the grass by the time Ella arrived. She pressed her hand into that bent outline, and something broke open in her that she would not find words for until much later. On the drive home, she finally called him, the man from the photograph, the man she had chosen instead. He answered on the third ring, sounding distracted. When she asked what they were to each other, he suggested they take some space. She hung up before he finished the sentence. She didn't cry, she just drove. That silence in the car was the first honest moment she'd had in 2 years. 2 weeks after the envelope, Ella hired Detective Lena Watts. Lena was methodical and unimpressed and charged by the hour, and before she took the case, she looked Ella in the eye and said, "If he's hiding from you, there's usually a reason. Are you sure you want to find him?" Ella said yes. 3 weeks later, Lena brought a thin file to the kitchen table, always the kitchen table, and set it down. She had traced the general region, confirmed the practice, confirmed he was operating under his own name, hiding from nothing except proximity. Then she paused, which Ella said was unusual for a woman who seemed constitutionally opposed to pausing, and she opened one specific page. Phoenix had prepaid the utilities not for 60 days, as the letter stated, but for a full year. He had arranged it 6 months before he was even gone. Lena said she had worked a lot of these cases. She had never seen anyone leave the way this man left. At the door, she stopped once more and said, "I'd think carefully before you show up where he is. Not for his sake." Then she was gone, and Ella sat with the file unopened for 4 hours. Ella's mother, Ruth, arrived unannounced on a Saturday, the way she always did, as if the world organized its schedule around her. She walked through the house with the assessing eyes of a woman who has always treated other people's lives as evidence for her own opinions. She sat across from Ella and said Phoenix was always too quiet. Said Ella needed someone with more fire, more energy. Said you cannot build a life with a man who simply accepts everything. And something shifted in Ella right then. Something that had been building for weeks finally found its frame. She looked at her mother and she understood, with the clarity that only comes from a certain kind of pain, exactly where she had learned it all. The performing, the confusing of peace for boredom, the reaching for chaos because stillness felt like being forgotten. Ruth had taught her every bit of it without a single deliberate lesson. Ella stood up and said, "He didn't just accept everything, Mom. He saw everything, for 2 years, and he still made sure I was okay before he left." Then she asked her mother to go home. Ruth left without argument. It was the first boundary Ella Grond had ever set. It would not be the last. She drove to where I was on a Tuesday. She told herself she just needed to see me. Not to beg, not to explain, just to confirm I was real and breathing and not destroyed. She found the property without difficulty. Gravel road, modest house, a truck in the driveway she didn't recognize, porch light burning in the early evening. She pulled over and turned off her engine. She sat there for 40 minutes and never got out of the car. I know this because Mrs. Albright told me later. She had called Ella the week before Ella made the drive, and after Ella came back, Ella told her everything. She sat outside my house practicing sentences that all died unfinished, because she understood, somewhere in that 40 minutes, that she did not have the right to knock on that door. Not because I had forbidden her anything, I had forbidden her nothing. I had left her the house and the money and the dignity of a letter that took no jabs. In leaving, I had treated her better than she treated me in 2 years of staying. She started her car. She turned around. Somewhere between mile 40 and mile 80 she began to cry, not for what she lost, but for who she had been. 6 weeks after the envelope, Mrs. Albright came across the street with a tin of cookies and something heavier than baked goods. She sat at the kitchen table and placed a small photograph next to the tin, not the photograph of Ella and the man. This one was different. It was me. Taken through the kitchen window on some ordinary evening, printed from Mrs. Albright's old digital camera. I was at the kitchen table, reading, coffee cup at my elbow, completely alone. And on my face, caught between page turns, was a small, private smile. The kind of expression that only exists when a person is briefly, genuinely content and has no idea anyone is watching. Mrs. Albright said she hadn't planned to take it. She said I always looked so peaceful in there, and she thought it was lovely. She slid it across the table and said she didn't think it was hers to keep. Ella picked it up. She looked at the man on the other side of a window, at peace, content, smiling at nothing. And she understood what she had actually destroyed. Not the marriage, not the house, not the finances. She had destroyed the peace, his peace, the quiet, private, costly peace of a man who asked for so little. 8 weeks out, Dara called, not with my address, with something I had said the morning I left. She told Ella about the phone call where she had begged me to confront Ella immediately, and I had refused. She told her exactly what I said. I need to make sure she'll be okay before I go. That's not weakness, Dara. That's just who I am. Ella was silent for a long time. Then Dara said the thing she had been holding for 2 months, careful and deliberate, the way our family delivers hard truths, like setting down something fragile rather than throwing it. She said, he wasn't protecting you because he was weak. He was protecting you because he loved you more than he needed to be right. Then she said one more thing. She said I was not waiting, that I was not sitting somewhere hoping Ella would come find me, that I was already living. But I thought you should know who he is, Dara said. I thought you should know what you actually had. The call ended without goodbye. Ella sat looking out the kitchen window at Mrs. Albright's house across the street and made a decision. Not about me, about herself. She called a therapist the following morning. 14 months after the envelope, a letter arrived with no return address. Inside was a single photograph printed on proper photo paper, clean, deliberate, considered. It was me. On the porch of my house, the one I built without telling anyone. Wooden chair, coffee cup on the railing, looking out at something beyond the frame. My face in profile, caught mid-moment, holding that same expression Mrs. Albright had photographed through a kitchen window years earlier. Quiet, private, content. On the back, no words, no 4-word sentences, no explanation, just today's date and my initials. PG, I was telling her nothing and everything at once. I was alive. I was well. I had not become bitter. This was where I was now. Ella propped the photograph against the kitchen window. She sat across from it at the table, always the same table, and looked at it for a long time. She was not crying. For the first time in 14 months, when she thought of me, she felt something she did not yet have a word for. Something halfway between grief and gratitude. Something that resembled, against all reason and all the damage, peace. The kind of peace she was only now beginning to understand that I had been sitting in all along, right there at that kitchen table with my book and my coffee cup, waiting for her to see it. She never had, until now.